Well, this morning I spoke with NATO's Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg about how the alliance is responding to Russia's invasion. Secretary General, thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
Should Canadians expect that this meeting on Thursday will mean new commitments for Canada's armed forces?
They should expect that this meeting will demonstrate unity in NATO, sending a clear message to Ukraine that we are there to support them, and Canada has been leading in our efforts to provide support to Ukraine over many years, and also a message that we need to strengthen our deterrence and defense, especially in the eastern part of the alliance, to make sure that President Putin in Moscow understands that we are there to protect each other, and by doing that, preventing this conflict from escalating beyond Ukraine.
Strengthen, though, surely that requires new resources.
Yes, and therefore I welcome the fact that all allies have stepped up. Last week I was in Latvia with President Trudeau and Defense Minister Annan, and there I actually witnessed how Canada are now deploying more troops to Latvia, something we all very much welcome. How Canada has deployed one more frigate under NATO command. And then, of course, we also very much know that for many, many years, Canada has been one of the really lead nations in NATO, training and equipping tens of thousands of Ukrainian troops, which are now on the front line fighting the invading Russian forces. But of course, there is a need to do more, and that's also the reason why I believe that at the summit next week, we will also start a discussion not only about the immediate response to the crisis in Ukraine, but also how we should adapt NATO, reset our deterrence and defense for the longer term as a result of this brutal war that is taking place in Ukraine.
Talking about the immediacy for a moment, there are 3,400 Canadian members of the armed forces on standby. Should we expect that they will be called upon imminently?
I will not speculate about that. It is important in itself that we both have deployed more troops in the eastern part of the alliance. Canada is part of that effort, but also that we have more troops on high readiness that can quickly reinforce. We have now hundreds of thousands of troops across the alliance on heightened alert. We have 100,000 US troops in Europe, and we have more Canadian troops in Europe. And then European allies are also stepping up. Germany, UK has doubled or have doubled their presence in the Baltic countries. Allies are also deploying Patriot air defense systems to Romania, to Slovakia, and other countries in the eastern part of the alliance. So we are doing a huge joint effort, and then of course we will deploy more if needed on short notice, if that's the decision that our commanders will take.
You have repeatedly said that when it comes to the question of humanitarian corridors, they must be respected, that is the bare minimum. We have seen how that is not seeming to be the case. Should NATO play a role in enforcing those humanitarian corridors?
So what we now see in Ukraine is a brutality, is a scale and a type of war we haven't seen in Europe since the Second World War. And President Putin is responsible. This is President Putin's war, and he should end this war immediately, withdrawing its troops and forces and engaging good faith in political dialogue with a sovereign independent nation, Ukraine. We provide support to Ukraine, military support, humanitarian support, and billions of dollars in financial support. But NATO will not be present on the ground and not send in planes in the Ukrainian airspace, because that will most likely trigger a full-fledged war between NATO and Russia. And that will cause even more suffering, even more civilian casualties, even more death and destruction. So we have two responsibilities: support Ukraine, but also prevent the conflict from escalating beyond Ukraine.
Yet, you know, there has been much discussion about what escalation could look like and how NATO is prepared for it. Russia has said it could target shipments of military supplies from allies to Ukraine, arguing that these are legitimate targets. Now, I know that you have warned against that. What would NATO do, though, if it happened?
Our main responsibility is to protect NATO territory, and an attack on NATO territory will trigger the response from the whole alliance. That's NATO's core task. That's our Article 5 collective defense clause, one for all for one. And to make sure that there is no room for misunderstanding about that in Moscow, we have increased significantly the military presence on land, at sea and in the air, with more troops, with more planes, with more ships. And by doing that, the aim, of course, is not to provoke a conflict or to actually fight the conflict, but it is to prevent the conflict. So this increased presence is sending a message that an attack on NATO territory will trigger a response from the whole alliance, and by doing that, we have preserved peace, prevented an attack on NATO allies for more than 70 years, and that's also, of course, the purpose in the current crisis.
The amount that Canada spends on its military has certainly been a topic of discussion recently, given what's going on in Ukraine. And as you may know, Canada's defense minister has said that she is going to put forward options to aggressively increase Canada's spending. She said she's going to be putting out there a possibility where Canada doesn't reach its 2% NATO target, one where it meets the target, and one budgetary option where it actually surpasses that 2% target. What would your message be to Canadians and the Canadian government as they debate where they want to fall on that question of military spending?
My message is partly that I welcome what Canada does in our alliance. Canada really contributes to our collective defense with troops, with capabilities, and also the support that Canada has been providing to Ukraine for many years is something which is welcomed by all allies. But in a more dangerous world, we need to invest more in our security, and therefore NATO allies agreed at the NATO summit in 2014 that we should increase defense spending. All allies, also Canada, have done so, but of course I expect allies to do more, and therefore I welcome the, as I say, renewed focus from the Canadian government on the need to further increase defense spending, and I expect allies to follow up on that, including Canada.
So I want to be explicit here. If the option is to pursue more aggressive spending, you're saying Canada ought to do that now?
So we have an agreement, and I expect all allies, also Canada, to follow up on that we should aim at 2% of GDP, because we live in a world which is more dangerous. Most allies reduced defense spending after the end of the Cold War when tensions went down, but when tensions are going up, then we need to once again invest more in defense, and I expect all allies, also Canada, to follow up on that pledge.
So in closing, I just want to ask you then, one of the options on the table is not to meet that target. What do you think it would say about Canada or any other NATO member choosing not to do that, given what's happening in the world right now?
I'm confident that Canada will follow up. Canada has already increased. Canada is providing key capabilities to NATO's missions. Canada is increasing their presence in the eastern part of our alliance in Latvia. And I also expect Canada to invest more, as other allies also do now, in light of the more aggressive actions and the brutal war we see in Ukraine.
Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me.